Calico Joe Chapter 8. Joe arrived home in the early hours of Monday morning. The lights were on. His parents were waiting. As he parked at the curb, he noticed a large poster staked near the mailbox. It was a replica of the back of a Cubs game jersey with a bold blue number 15 in the center of it. He looked around. Every yard on Church Street had the same poster. Later, he would realize that every front lawn in Calico Rock displayed one too, as well as the windows of every store, office, bank, and cafe. His mother's family was from South Louisiana, and Joe had been raised on Cajun food. His favorite was red beans and rice with Andalous sauce, and at 3 o'clock that morning, he devoured a plateful. Then he slept until noon. Charlie Castle was 8 years older than Joe. He was married with 2 small children and lived in a new home on the edge of town. The family and many friends gathered there late Tuesday afternoon for hot dogs and ice cream. The real purpose, though, was to see Joe, to touch him, to make sure he was real, and to somehow and in some dignified way convey the immense pride they felt. He made it easy. At home, far away from Chicago, far away from anywhere real, the past 12 days seemed surreal, and at times he seemed dazed as his admirers. He signed autographs, posed for photos, and even kissed a few babies. The All-Star game was on in the den, but everyone was outside. They had Joe to themselves, but only for a moment. The world was clawing for him, greatness was waiting, and Joe would soon return to center stage. There's not a lot going on there at the beginning of this chapter, but really it just reminds us of how proud this small town of Calico Rock, Arkansas is of Joe. I watched the All-Star game at home, but with my mother. The Sabatanis invited me over, but I had a black eye and refused to leave the house. My parents were at war, and eventually my father had fled to the city, where he would no doubt go to a bar and start more trouble. Before he left, he apologized for hitting me, but the apology meant absolutely nothing. I hated the man. I think my mother did too. Jill had long since given up on him. So we knew last chapter that the altercation in the backyard had turned violent. We find out in this chapter that that Paul has a black eye. So his dad hurt him pretty badly there. The game was in Kansas City, and it turned into a celebration of Willie Mays, who was the greatest all-star performer ever. In a remarkable 24 games, he had 23 hits, including 3 home runs, 3 triples, 2 doubles, and a highlight reel full of great defensive plays. Now he was 42 years old, sitting on the bench for the Mets, and planning to retire at the end of the season. I was the only kid I knew who had actually met Willie Mays, which how cool is that, right? To meet one of your idols, like one of your sports heroes that you look up to. Early in the season, the Mets had their annual family day at Shea Stadium. Most of the players' wives and kids were there to meet each other and pose for photographs. There was ice cream, autographs, tours of the stadium and locker room, and lots of souvenirs. My father had reluctantly allowed me to take part in this wonderful event. I had my picture taken with Willie Mays, Tom Seaver, Rusty Staub, and most of the Mets. My mother had these enlarged to 8 by 10, and they were neatly filed away in my scrapbooks. I had thick ones for Tom Seaver and Willie Mays, the only 2 Mets to make the All-Star team. As I watched the game, I wondered what they really thought of Warren Tracy. Sure, they were teammates, but I doubted if they cared much for my father. As much as I tried to loosen him up, he rarely talked about the other Mets. He ran around with a couple of relievers from the bullpen, and he would occasionally tell a funny story about something that happened around the clubhouse or on the road, stories that were suitable for our ears. His manager, Yogi Berra, was good for an occasional laugh, but the big Mets, Tom Seaver, Willie Mays, Jerry Koosman, Rusty Staub, were off limits. Looking back, I think he resented their success. For the American League, the fans had selected such greats as Brooks Robinson, Reggie Jackson, and Rod Carew. Catfish Hunter started on the mound. In the National League, the Reds had 3 starters, Pete Rose, Joe Morgan, and Johnny Bench. The Cubs had 2, Ron Santo and Billy Williams. Hank Aaron was at first base. A record 54 players made it into the game, and I had the Topps baseball card for every one. I knew their ages, birthplaces, heights, weights, and all of their stats. I did not deliberately memorize all this data. I simply absorbed it. The game was my world, the players my idols. The game, though, had just delivered a nasty blow, and I was a wounded boy. The right side of my face was swollen, and the eye was closed. I was so happy my father was not playing in the All-Star game, because I would not have been able to endure it. He never came close, though with his twisted ego, he felt slighted. It was such a relief to have him out of the house. So again, he reveals a little bit more. It's not just a black eye that he has on the right side of his face, but it's like his entire right side of his face is completely swollen from what happened with his dad in the backyard after his last baseball game. My mother sat nearby, reading a paperback, paying no attention to the game, but staying close to me. After he stormed out and things calmed down, she told me that he would never hit me again. I took this to mean she was about to leave him, or he would leave us, or there would be some manner of a breakup. I whispered this to Jill, and we were delighted at first. Then we began to wonder where we would live. What would happen to him? How could Mom survive without his income? As the scenarios unfolded, we had more and more questions, troubling ones. I suppose every kid wants his parents to stay together, but as the day wore on, I found myself torn between the uncertainties of a divorce and the pleasant thoughts of a life without my father. I leaned towards the latter. When Ron Santo walked to the plate in the second inning, Kurt Gowdy and Tony Kubek couldn't wait to launch into the Joe Castle story. They had been at Wrigley just 10 days earlier for a historic event and recapped it as Santo worked the count off Catfish Hunter. After 11 games, Joe had 40 at-bats, 29 hits, 12 home runs, and 14 stolen bases. He had hit safely in every game, and more important, the Cubs had won 9 of the 11 and were in first place in the National League East. Wrigley Field had sold out not only for each of the 6 games Joe had played there, but for every game until after Labor Day. So Joe is doing wonders for the fans. Yes, the people back at home in Calico Rock, Arkansas love him, but so do Cubs fans. He is just like a fun player to watch, and he's good at his job. So he's just selling out Wrigley Field with Cubs fans. Kubek offered the same speculation that was making the rounds. The wise men of baseball, including my father, were predicting that the pitchers would soon catch on to Joe and find his weaknesses. His current batting average of .725 was ridiculous and certain to plummet as he made his way around the league. Gowdy was not so sure. "I didn't notice any holes in his swing," he said. "Nor did I," Kubek quickly agreed. "He struck out only twice. Great balance. He stays back, incredible bat speed." Poor Ron Santo was overshadowed by his rookie teammate, who, at that moment, was eating his Aunt Rachel's homemade strawberry ice cream in Calico Rock, Arkansas, and oblivious to the game. When play resumed on July 26th, the Cubs opened a 4-game series in Cincinnati against the Big Red Machine, the most dominant team of the 1970s. With a lineup that included Pete Rose, Johnny Bench, Joe Morgan, and Tony Perez, the Reds narrowly lost the 1972 World Series in 7 games to the A's, the one at all in 1975 and 1976. They were leading the Dodgers by 2 games in the National League West. As usual, a large crowd was on hand, and most were curious to see if the bat of Joe Castle had cooled off during the All-Star break. It had not. Joe hit a solo home run in his first at-bat and barely missed another one in the 4th inning. He was 3 for 4 in Game 1, 2 for 5 in Game 2, 2 for 4 in Game 3, and 1 for 3 in Game 4. The team split the series, and the Reds would go on to win 99 games and take the National League West. For the series, Joe went 8 for 16, and his average dropped to .661. Another obscure record was suddenly in sight. In 1941, a Red rookie by the name of Chuck Alino made a dazzling debut by hitting safely in his first 17 games, a modern-day record that stood until 1973. Alino cooled off considerably and left baseball 3 years later after playing in only 118 games and hitting a .209. The experts, of course, were still predicting such a collapse for Joe Castle. Joe's 16th game was in Pittsburgh, and he got things started in the top of the first with a stand-up triple. The crowd and the Cubs were drawing well on the road, applauded politely. Pirates fans had been spoiled with the likes of Roberto Clemente, Willie Stargell, and Al Oliver, and they knew their baseball. They were watching history, and though they wanted to win, they also were pulling for this new kid. The second game went 14 innings. Joe got 5 hits and 7 at-bats. He tied Alino's record with a home run in his 17th game, then broke it with 2 doubles in his 18th. When the Cubs left Pittsburgh for a 3-game series in Montreal, Joe had played in 19 games, had hit safely in each, and was sporting a gaudy batting average of .601, with 14 home runs and 17 stolen bases. Records were still falling. Baseball had never seen such a furious start by a rookie. The Cubs were the hottest team in baseball and led the Pirates in the East by 6 games. So a lot of people keep saying, okay, once these major leaguers figure out Joe Castle, he's not going to be this guy we think he is. Yeah, he has a hot start, but once the pitchers figure him out, we're not going to hear from him anymore. But it seems like maybe that's not true because he's still breaking records as the season goes on. The August 6th issue of Sports Illustrated had on its cover the smiling face of Joe Castle. The photo was shot from the waist up. A baseball bat ran the length of his broad shoulders, and he held both ends tightly with his hands. His biceps were sufficiently flexed. It was a look of raw power. The bold caption above his head read, "Calico Joe," and below his chest, "The Phenom." The writer spent time in Calico Rock. He interviewed Joe's family, friends, and former coaches and teammates. The article was thorough, fair, and balanced and provided the first in-depth look at Joe's background. A valuable source was Clarence Rook, sports editor of the Calico Rock Record, an unofficial baseball historian for Izard County, Arkansas. And we've heard that name before. So this guy that they interview a lot for this Sports Illustrated article for Joe, his name is Clarence Rook, and he's the guy that Paul has gone to see all these years later.